Hello. It's time for another reading of the Bhagavad Gita. And this time we're dealing with chapter 2, verses 39 to 42. I have described all of this to you intellectually, but you must understand this from the perspective of enlightened consciousness, beyond the limits of intellectual thought. If you can enter into enlightened thought, you will be free of the restrictions of karmic consequences. Even in attempting this form of understanding, you cannot go wrong. Even if you reach a limited form of enlightened understanding, it will help you to decrease your distress. So, this first two verses are then kind of repeated in the next two verses. But I wanted to touch on these two first. What Krishna is saying here is that you can't just process the Bhagavad Gita from the point of view of your mind. You have to engage it through a system of practice. If you're not meditating, if you're not engaging with the pursuit of enlightenment, then whatever it is that I'm talking about here in these commentaries, for example, are not really going to come through to you. You'll understand them maybe intellectually, you'll find maybe the historical details interesting or the religious details interesting, but to get the core of what Krishna is saying, you actually have to be a practitioner. That's the perspective of enlightened consciousness. So this is beyond the boundaries of what you can think, because you have to experience it, you have to live through it. Only then can you break out of what Krishna here calls the restrictions of karmic consequences. And I want to clear up what we're talking about with karma here. Karma is the pattern of cause and effect. It's not some kind of energy. It's not that the gods will punish people who are bad and reward people who are good, which a lot of times you hear. It's not something where you get good karma or bad karma, and so that if you do good things, more good things will happen to you, or vice versa necessarily. What karma is, very simply, is cause and effect. That as you do things, it has consequences, and those consequences produce effects further down the line. It doesn't necessarily mean that bad people will have bad things happen to them all the time, or even eventually. This is a misunderstanding of karma, where people tend to think that karma would mean that in the end, in some way, bad people will be punished and good people will be rewarded. Not necessarily. What karma does mean, however, is that whatever you're operating under, you're going to be bound by those choices you make. So if you make choices that are more restrictive to you, you're going to be more restricted. If you argue for your limitations, then you will have them. Likewise, if you try to break free of your limitations, then your area of effect, your ability to operate, your field of vision will be expanded. And that's what matters in context of these verses. There's a lot of other consequences to karma, and really karma is a long-term game. It has nothing to do with each individual. It's not like, the Christian, the fundamentalist Christian perspective, you could say, where you have Jesus and he's going to punish every single person that does bad or reward people that do good or something like that. Because it's not really about any one individual. It's about a stream of cause and effect. And so it's something bigger even than your own life. But in the context of your own life, you can engage in actions that make you more bound, that make you more limited, that trap you, that reduce your options, or you can be more unbound and have options that expand your movement. So Krishna says that even if you attempt this form of understanding, that means that whatever you do to try to expand your consciousness, you cannot go wrong. Just the very act, there's no wrong way to practice, there's no wrong way to meditate if you're actually doing it, if you're engaging with it as a discipline. So you don't have to worry about, wasted time or something like that, or that you're not having some of the things that you've heard other people have happen to them or things like that, right? Every step you take towards expanding your consciousness has an effect of liberating you, freeing you from the restrictions of karma. So every amount that you reach, every attempt that you make, makes you a little more free. The next two verses. If you are determined to be conscious, to be enlightened, you will achieve greater unity to reality, my beloved friend. There are various paths by which you can reach this enlightenment, and thus be free from internal division. All of these flowery words have been said before by those who have not actually achieved this enlightenment, by those who claim to be religious, but there is no substitute for the actual experience. So here, Krishna is saying that the determination to be enlightened, the determination to engage in a practice, to meditate, to be more open, to be more complete, to be more total, which is, if there's one thing you can summarize Krishna's teaching, it's totality. It's about being complete, being total as a human being. Any attempt to do that brings you closer to reality, and that's a very important point. It makes you closer to a unity to reality. That what happens when we're not engaging with enlightenment, when we're not trying to be conscious, when we're not practicing meditation, when we're not being aware, is that we are distancing ourselves from reality. Karma is like closing yourself up and trying to impose your own vision, your own reality, your own notions on reality, rather than engaging with reality as it actually is. So the more that you're doing this, the more real existence becomes for you, and the more you can engage with it. Krishna points out that there are many paths by which you can reach this enlightenment. And in fact, the Bhagavad Gita, pretty much every chapter after this one, goes systematically along looking at many of the different elements or techniques of working the process of enlightenment. And it comes to a certain conclusion from Krishna's teaching of what he feels is the best way. But he recognizes that there are many different ways that you can potentially achieve this. So there isn't even a question of that you might be doing the wrong method or something like that. If there's sincerity exists within you, then that's already a major step. And of course, technical ability is important. Practicing correctly is important. If you've got a more solid foundation in terms of teaching, if you have a teacher that is qualified to be a teacher, that is very helpful. All those things can help. But even without any of those things, a sincere wish within your heart, matched with a determination to make an effort, is the most significant thing, because right there you will break out of illusions you have about methods, about teachers, about all these other things. You'll see what doesn't actually work if you're being sincere. Falsehood happens only because you're false. So if you're not sincere about what you're practicing or why you're practicing, you're going to be stuck in these forms of false methods. What he talks about, these flowery words of people that claim to be religious. But as soon as you're willing to have actual experience, which is hard and it's scary sometimes, but as soon as you're willing to actually do that, then other things, a chain of events, cause and effect, will take place. And you'll move away from the false and move towards the true. So Krishna points out that there are these flowery words that have been said by those who have not actually achieved this enlightenment. That is to say, that there's all kinds of people who will either intellectualize, I mean, we're not even necessarily talking about spiritual frauds, right? But those do exist also. And they exist and they succeed because there's a bunch of people who as students are frauds, who are not really sincere about practicing. And so people who aren't really sincere teachers attract people who are not really sincere practitioners. Because an insincere practitioner will sooner or later run away from a sincere teacher. And a sincere practitioner will sooner or later move towards a sincere teacher. So there is no substitute for the actual experience. There's no amount of reading Holy Scriptures or engaging in religious ritual that will help you if you don't first have a sincerity in what you're doing, and if you are not engaging in actual practice yourself. You can't just try to intellectually understand mystical truths. That ends up being worthless. It's not a real understanding unless you go out and do the practice. But Krishna reassures you that if you do the practice, even a little bit, then just by attempting it, you will be gaining momentum. You will be moving ahead. If you just secondhand absorb scriptures, teachings, religion, whatever, but you don't actually bother to engage in it experientially yourself, you're never going to get anywhere. That's it for today.